Did you know that silver hitting 66 an ounce isn't just a record-breaking number? It's the final warning signal of a pattern that has destroyed economies 3 times in the last 150 years. We are watching a $318 trillion debt crisis collide with a calculated supply squeeze that has left the United States with zero strategic reserves. This isn't bad luck, it was engineered. I'm going to break down the exact timeline of this collapse and reveal the one move you need to make before the global financial board gets completely flipped. Welcome to Fiscal Flare. When the ticker tape flashed on December 17, 2025, showing silver at 66 an ounce, the financial news networks cheered. They called it a bull market. They called it a victory for commodities. They interviewed day traders who had doubled their money in a month, framing the event as just another lucky cycle in the casino of global finance. But they are looking at the smoke, not the fire. What is happening right now is not a rally. It is a siege. While the Western world was hypnotized by the digital volatility of cryptocurrency and the endless political theater in Washington, a silent war was being fought over the physical foundations of the 21st century. And the United States just lost. For 15 years, a trap was meticulously set. It was not built with missiles or aircraft carriers, but with supply chains, refining quotas, and silent accumulation. A rival power, the entity that now controls the solar panels on your roof and the electronics in your pocket, quietly bought the board while we were arguing over the rules. On January 1st, 2026, the trap snaps shut. The export lines will be cut. The swing supplier that kept prices low for a decade is about to become the gatekeeper of scarcity. To understand why this is happening and why the United States has found itself with zero strategic reserves at the exact moment it needs them most, we have to look past the headlines. We have to understand the 4-stage mechanism. This is a specific, repeatable pattern of economic warfare. It is the blueprint nations use to strip wealth from their rivals without firing a single shot. It is not random. It is not bad luck. It is a mathematical sequence that has been executed 3 distinct times in history. To see where we are going next, we first have to understand the machinery of the theft. And to do that, we must define the pattern itself. There is a pattern to how nations lose their wealth. It isn't chaotic and it isn't accidental. It is a 4-stage mechanism that works with the precision of a clock. Stage 1 is silent accumulation. While a resource is undervalued and ignored, a strategic player quietly buys everything they can. There are no press conferences, there are no headlines, just the steady, systematic acquisition of an asset that everyone else has forgotten matters. Stage 2 is suppression. Once the player has accumulated enough, they flood the market. They export heavily at cheap prices. This lulls the world into a false sense of security. Competitors stop mining, they sell off their own reserves because the price is flat. Crucially, they become addicted to the cheap supply. They forget how to survive without it. Stage 3 is the pivot. This is the trap. The dominant player suddenly restricts exports. They introduce licensing requirements. The cheap supply vanishes overnight, and the world realizes there is only one source left. Stage 4 is the transfer. As prices explode, wealth flows violently in one direction. The nation that executed the pattern ascends, and the nations that were asleep at the wheel are stripped of their capital. This isn't theory, this is history. Let's look at the first time this machine was turned on, February 12, 1873. President Ulysses S. Grant sits at his desk and signs the Coinage Act. To most, it looked like boring bureaucratic housekeeping. But buried deep in the text, in Section 15, was a weapon. The standard silver dollar, the money of the people, was omitted from the list of authorized coins. Silver was demonetized. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. Why? Because Stage 1 had already happened. Eastern banking interests and international financiers had quietly accumulated gold, while working Americans, farmers, miners, and laborers held their savings in silver. Then came Stage 2, the act itself. By deleting silver from the money supply, the available currency in America instantly contracted. Stage 3 was the long depression that followed. From 1873 to 1879, deflation destroyed the economy. Prices for crops collapsed. Farmers couldn't pay their debts. Businesses failed in waves. But for the bankers holding gold, their purchasing power multiplied. Every dollar they held bought more land, more labor, and more control. They called it the crime of 1873. Senator William Teller called it a fraud stealthily passed. But the outrage didn't matter. The mechanism had already run. The wealth had transferred from the silver-holding West to the gold-holding East. That was the first time. But the machine was just getting warmed up. 98 years later, it would be used again, this time to break the entire world. Jump forward 98 years. The date is August 15, 1971. We are in the Oval Office. President Richard Nixon is staring into a television camera, preparing to tell the American people that the dollar, the bedrock of the global economy, is about to change forever. For 27 years, under the Bretton Woods Agreement, the world had operated on a simple promise. The US dollar was as good as gold, pegged at 35 an ounce. This was the architecture of American dominance. But the Stage 1 accumulation had been running against us for decades. Throughout the 1960s, the United States spent money it didn't have. We funded the Vietnam War, the space race, and the Great Society programs by printing paper claims. Billions of dollars flooded overseas. Foreign central banks, smart players like France and West Germany, realized the scam. They knew we had printed far more receipts than we had gold in the vault, so they started cashing out. By 1971, the run on the bank was underway. France literally sent a battleship to New York Harbor to retrieve their gold bars. Britain requested $3 billion in gold be moved from Fort Knox. The United States was down to just 10,000 metric tons of reserves. The bluff was called. Stage 2 was the crisis. On that Sunday night, Nixon suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold. He told the public it was temporary. It was a lie. The gold window never reopened. Stage 3 was the pivot to pure paper. The dollar became a fiat currency, untethered from reality. Stage 4 was the brutal transfer of the 1970s. Inflation exploded to double digits. The purchasing power of the American saver was incinerated. But for those who held gold, the price rocketed from 35 an ounce to over 800 by 1980. The nations and individuals who held the metal saw their wealth multiply 24 times over. The nations holding the paper saw their wealth evaporate. Both of these events, 1873 and 1971, were devastating. But there is a crucial difference between then and now. Those were acts of desperation. They were last-ditch efforts to save a dying system. What is happening right now with China and silver is different. This isn't a desperate reaction. This is a premeditated attack. This is the mechanism being executed, not as a shield, but as a sword. Now, let's look at the board today. This isn't ancient history. This is the machine running in real time. For the last 15 years, while the West was distracted, China was executing Stage 1. From 2010 to 2024, they quietly cornered the physical market. They didn't just buy the metal, they bought the process. Today, China controls the vast majority of global silver refining. Industry insiders estimate they have accumulated over 70,000 metric tons in undisclosed, off-the-books stockpiles. They drained the global vaults while reporting deficits, absorbing every ounce the market didn't want. Then came Stage 2, the suppression. China became the world's swing supplier. For a decade, they exported silver at cheap, suppressed prices. They flooded London, Switzerland, and Hong Kong. This wasn't charity, it was anesthesia. They kept the price low to make the West comfortable. American industries, solar manufacturers, EV makers, defense contractors became addicted to this cheap, endless flow of Chinese silver. And what did the United States do during this time? We walked right into the trap. We liquidated our shield. In 1968, the U.S. National Defense Stockpile held 165 million ounces of silver. By 2002, we had sold it all. Today, our strategic silver reserve is zero. We stripped the armor off our own economy just as the arrow was being drawn back. Stage 3 began on January 1, 2026. The trap has sprung. China's Ministry of Commerce has placed silver under state trading management. That is polite diplomatic language for total export control. The cheap silver is gone. The swing supplier is now the sole proprietor. The results were instantaneous. In January 2025, silver was trading at 29 an ounce. By December 17th, it hit 66. That is a 107% repricing in 12 months. But the price isn't the problem. The availability is the problem. America imports nearly 80% of its silver. We need it for cruise missiles, for solar panels, for the chips in our fighter jets. And suddenly, the country that produces the vast majority of our supply has decided to turn off the tap. This is the pivot. The United States is now scrambling to rebuild a stockpile that took decades to accumulate, but we are trying to buy it in a market that no longer exists. And this leads us to the final, most terrifying phase of the cycle. Because when the price goes to 100, 200, or beyond, it's not just about inflation, it's about who owns the future. Now, the bill comes due. This is Stage 4, the transfer. The United States is waking up to a mathematical nightmare. To rebuild a strategic stockpile comparable to what we held in 1968, about 165 million ounces, at today's price of 66, would cost over $11 billion. But that assumes we can even buy it at 66. The moment the U.S. government enters the market with a buy order that size, the price won't stay at 66. Analysts are already projecting 100 per ounce by mid-2026. At that price, the cost to secure our national defense balloons to 16.5 billion. We are preparing to pay a 400% premium to buy back the exact same metal we sold for pennies 20 years ago. But the financial cost is just the tip of the iceberg. The real transfer is strategic. The green energy transition, the entire political and economic promise of the next 30 years, is built on silver. You cannot build a solar panel without silver paste. You cannot build an electric vehicle without silver contacts. And right now, China produces over 80% of the world's solar panels. They have positioned themselves to decide who gets to build the future and at what price. While American industries are holding futures contracts, paper promises that claim to own silver, China is holding the physical bars behind the export wall. When the music stops, the paper burns and the metal remains. In 1873, the gold-holding bankers won. In 1971, the gold-holding nations won. In 2026, the entity holding the silver wins. The pattern has executed. The wealth transfer is underway. And the United States is finding out the hard way that you cannot print a commodity. You cannot quantitative ease a physical resource into existence. The machine does not care about our modern monetary theory. It does not care about our stock market valuations. It cares about control. And the control has officially shifted. So, what does this mean for you? The history of wealth is the history of forgetting. We forgot that money must be anchored in reality. We forgot that supply chains are weapons. And most importantly, we forgot that the paper in our wallets is just a claim on wealth, not wealth itself. China didn't forget. They remembered the lesson of 1873. They studied the shock of 1971. And while we were busy celebrating our financialized economy, they spent 15 years building a trap that would close on December 17, 2025. The mechanism is complete. The silver squeeze is not a temporary market anomaly. It is the new reality. The era of cheap resources is over. The transfer of wealth from those who hold paper to those who hold the physical components of the future has begun. But this isn't just about silver. Silver was just the first domino. If you look closely at the board, you'll see the exact same pattern forming in gold, in oil, and in semiconductors. The machine is running on all cylinders, and the entity that understands the pattern controls the outcome. The game is already over. The question is no longer, can we stop it? The question is, are you holding the asset that is rising or the currency that is falling? If you want to see the full architecture of the system, if you want to know what the central banks are doing with their gold reserves while they tell you to stay in the stock market, hit subscribe. You have seen the mechanism. Now, you need to see the end game.